Hi, Lexi Daly here. I'm so excited to be with you this year for Paper Tray Ink Stamp-a-faire Masters. For my tutorial, we're going to create a color block card using stamped images, masking, and ink blending, all inspired by Andy Warhol. Let's get started. So here's a closer look at the card. We're going to be stamping the cans, masking them, both the image and the space around it, and then coloring it in. So let me set this aside. And here we have a stamped card with my 4 cans all lined up. And I do want to show you how I lined them up using the MISTI. Any stamp positioner of choice will be helpful, or drawing pencil lines if that helps you. But I just wanted to go through this since this is how I did it. So first I started with the card nested into the corner to stamp this first can in the upper right hand quadrant. I lined up the stamp, and I didn't worry too much about perfect placement because I knew I was going to be trimming around the cans. So as long as I had it up here with enough room to trim. So I stamped that, and then keeping it on the same nested into the bottom so that these 2 cans would be lined up, I moved it over and I measured again. I wanted to make sure there was 1/2 inch between the two, so I was using the squares as my guide, the grid as my guide, and I wanted 2, and that's where I stamped that. At this point, I drew this line that you see, so that I knew that that was where the edge needed to be for these 2 cans to line up. So the next thing I did, so at this point I had this one and then this one. The next thing I did was move it up, place it along that line, and found where the best placement of this row would be. And again, I was kind of looking at the grid and making sure that I had space between the two to create the quadrant, to create the block. And this is the can is rounded here, so it's kind of like almost 2 squares at this one, right? So next, I drew a line to remember which line on the grid pad that I was using to keep these 2 lined up. And then I simply moved it back to the side where I started, since I started over here in the corner, so that these 2 would line up. And then I stamped the last one. Just one way of lining it up. Again, you could draw pencil lines and erase them. Another stamp positioner could work very well. I've never really used another one until I had the MISTI, so I thought I'd share that. All right, so now we have our basic stamping done, and I'm going to show you how we'll continue with inking. Now, one of my tips is to mark off the spaces instead of drawing lines that the ink would cover and then might not erase. I like to use my score tool. So I just find roughly the center point here between these 2 cans, and then I just lightly do a score line, and then I do the same this way. And there I have my basic grid. I am also going to trim the edge to get my finished size. And the way that I came up with the size for this card was really just eyeballing it. It's probably how I cut and size things 90% of the time. I'm going to make sure that I line each side of the card up with the same line on here so that I have a consistent 1/4 inch, which would match with the 1/4 inch that I did on the inside. I can sometimes be a perfectionist about measuring, and I guess that's the other 10% of the time. But I do like quick and easy stamping, so I've developed a few tricks for measuring and cutting along the way. And now I have my basic panel. So next we're going to mask and ink. Now I have some masks that I created prior to this, and some of my tips for creating masks are making sure that you cut right on, even just inside the line, especially when you're doing color backgrounds like this. You don't want a white halo. Another tip for this project in particular is, since I was blending the ink right over the Post-it note and all to be able to get all around the can, I didn't want any leftover residue to blend with my inks. So I did two things to help with that. Number one, I used white Post-it notes. White tends to have less of a sheen, at least the ones that I have, and the ink seems to absorb into them a little bit better. When I used a colored Post-it, because that's what I grabbed first, and black ink, I did have a problem with my ink blending into my blended background. So white Post-its is a good thing, and if you don't have white, or even if you do, another thing I did was I made sure to use the same ink color that I was blending to stamp my mask. That way, if there was any residue left over, if it didn't all soak into the Post-it note, then it would just be the same color blending in as I worked. So I made one to match each of the background colors that I have. And then one last tip about the blending in this project in particular is I make sure to add my mask to the ink that I'm using to remind me to put it on, because that is something that I forgot several times in the planning process of this card. So I have my four all set up and ready. I'm going to do the yellow with the pink, teal with the blue, and then I'm going to do blue with the lighter with the Hawaiian Shores, and then orange with the purple. So now I'm going to mask it off with painter's tape to be able to fill in each quarter with the inks we have set aside. So using that score line, I'm just going to line up my tape right up to that line. And then this way. And to protect my project even more, I'm going to use Post-it note over each of the quadrants that are left over. I don't want to accidentally drop my blending tool or my ink pad or anything else. And now, because I have my little stack ready, I'll put my mask down. I have used these once before. You can usually get 2 to 3 uses out of them depending on how much ink you're blending. And as long as they're drying in between. Okay, and so like you've seen many times on many videos, I am sure, I'm going to start off the edge and work into my project. I can also start in the middle once I get some on the edges, since my middle is masked as well. Now, you know that a Post-it note is sticky on only the edge, at least these white ones that I have. There are some that are completely sticky all the way. But if you don't have a Post-it note that is sticky all the way, like I did not, then you might want to consider adding a little bit of adhesive to the part of the Post-it note that is not sticky. So this is a two-way glue pen. I just put a little line around the edge, that kind of around the edge part that wasn't sticky. I let it dry and then it becomes removable, just like the Post-it. So we'll lift that up and we have a nice pretty yellow background. Now I'm going to move on and do each of the other 3 colors, and I will be back. And here we have a stamped and color blocked piece ready for coloring. I opted to use Copic markers for the coloring of this project because it would continue this flat, saturated look that I was going for based on Andy Warhol's can art paintings. There are a few things to keep in mind when working with Copics and dye inks. First of all, you might want to do some tests to make sure that your inks and your Copics work well together. I've used paper tray inks with Copics a lot and have had great success, but there are also a couple of things to note. You should make sure that your ink is fully dry. You should work quickly and with a light touch so that you don't oversaturate any area of your stamped image that you're going over so that it doesn't become fuzzy or bleed. And you should pick colors that will work well together. So I would encourage you to definitely use scratch paper, stamp something out, make sure it dries, color over it, see how it works together. Sometimes it really is about the pairing of colors in addition to the type of ink with the marker. But like I said, I've used paper tray inks quite a bit and I've had good success. So with all that said, I chose colors that were similar to the colors that I started with. And if you notice, when I started, I kind of picked a couple of dark ones, a couple of light ones for the background. I kept my cans lighter at the top so that my darker ones were at the bottom and it was a little bit of a heavier weighted piece towards the bottom. I kind of visually like that look. It kind of brings your eye down to the bottom of the card, which is where the sentiment will be. And then I continued picking similar colors in my markers. And so basically I'm just kind of sometimes repeating colors in another square. Occasionally I'm actually using a lighter color in the same square. There really was no rhyme or reason to it. I just played with color. I tried to keep some things repeated and maybe have instances of like here I have the darker teal with the lighter shade of it here, and then I'm also going to be pulling it in with a couple of markers up here. But the first thing I did was I chose 4 light colors for the can lids and for the hearts. And these 4 colors are right here. And I just did each lid in a color, and then I did each of the hearts in one of the same colors, but different. I kind of moved them around. So I'm going to do that really quickly, and then we'll get to the rest of the can. Okay, and then for the 4 can colors, the larger spaces, I wanted to pull in a couple of darker shades. Instead of the yellow, I decided to go for pink, which was also already on the card, and instead of this moon white lighter shade of blue-green, I decided to go with a darker shade mint green. As you notice, when I was coloring these, I just colored right over the lines in some of them, and if I needed a darker color, I'd wait till it dries and then go back, but I like them the way they are. So now I'm going to color with these, and I'm going to follow the same rules. Bigger spaces take a little bit longer maybe, and you need to cover as much as you can quickly. That's a little tricky, but if you need to go over it again, just wait till it dries and go over it a second time. So I'm going to do that and be right back. And there we have our completed panel that we can now turn into a card. You might have noticed that I did go over several of the colors. I just kind of wanted to flatten it out a little bit, kind of lessen my strokes because I was working really fast. But really it'll continue to blend into the paper a little bit, and it'll become less noticeable as it dries if there are strokes, but if it dries and you're not happy with it, you can always go back and add a little bit more. And you'll notice that where I did orange over the green, it changed the color a little bit, but it still blends well with the purple. With the blue in the background. Same with the purple over the heart right there. And the darker colors, I went right over the hearts. It doesn't really change them that much, or it just makes them kind of blend in more with the colors in this particular project. So let me get out the other pieces that we need and we'll turn it into a card. Okay, I have a sentiment already stamped. We have the card and we're going to create a white layer behind the card. So just a note about the sentiment, I lined up all my letters onto a block with a line. I didn't have enough Y's or O's to complete it, so I just left a little gap there, and then I added it in separately, took the Y and the O off and put them on their own block to then add them into my word. I love being able to create custom sentiments from time to time, and this one seemed perfect for the cans and all of the color that I was using. All right, so I'm going to first create a layer for my card. And I am going to do one of my tried and true methods of eyeballing it, and then I'll assemble the card. Here is our finished card. Relatively flat, so it'll be easy to mail, but full of color and personality. The perfect representation of Andy Warhol's pop art cans. Of course, the can was an easy subject matter for me to choose, but I can't wait to see what different images everyone else chooses and if they go for a larger grid or maybe a row of color blocked images. Really, there are so many possibilities, so many colored choices that you can go with, so just go have fun and make it pop. Thanks for watching. Head over to Nicole's blog for more details on how to play and post. I can't wait to see what you create. Bye!